All right. Never a presentation without the demo gods or the presentation gods being on your side. Thank you for having me, everyone. Today, we're going to talk about integrating community into your organization.
Have we lost him?
How's it now? Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you, Aslan.
Okay, wonderful. I'm going to just jump into sharing my screen and avoid turning my camera on. Maybe that'll help. All right. So going back to my journey with community management, I joined SAP very early on, helping Mark Finner and the team build the SAP Mentor Program. And later on, I moved on to build a business-focused community for our premier customer network at SAP, and then had the great opportunity of joining the startup program to focus on engaging startups and developers around the globe to build solutions on SAP's platform at that time. Following that, I moved on to taking on a role with the social media team at SAP globally, which really opened my eyes on how to operationalize the way you communicate with your audiences. But it was a little bit different since the developer community I was always part of were people that you knew. It was a closed community somewhat, although it was publicly available to all. But that was a shift in the kind of audience that I was engaging. And then one phone call and an email later, as many of my colleagues and friends referenced, I joined the dark side. I had a great opportunity to join the field organization, the sales organization, and help in the role of a customer officer as well as chief of staff to the chief revenue officer of the SAP's platform and analytics business. Now, I took that role with an expiration date in mind, and as I had a wonderful opportunity to join a company called Change Healthcare, I got the offer the day my daughter was born, so I was very close to the healthcare experience at that time, and decided to accept the role and build a brand new community with that team. Now, today, I want to talk about three key areas that I've focused on that's been helpful to me in rolling out communities in different various forms in my current organization, as well as the previous organization that I was part of. Now, I'll start with a story, and this is a story that I think Craig Schmiel also referenced somewhat in his presentation earlier today. I was told that when SAP started their blogging platform, they allowed their customers to blog right next to them, next to the employees. And among the various positive blogs, there was a blog around a customer being completely unhappy with their investment and all the many things that had gone wrong and how it was the fault of the brand. And before everybody lost their job on the community team, another customer came to the rescue and called out the reasons why they had that particular failure and how they could mitigate that. And it also became apparent that the company was not at fault, and sort of redeemed ourselves. So I think part of the fact that that team exists is because of that example of how being transparent with your customers helps you not only find different ways to drive value, but to also allow be comfortable when people talk about failures and be transparent. So I talk about culture entering the chat. That's the first step that I looked at when I entered my new role. And I asked myself a number of questions, and I encourage you to consider these as well. Are you a customer-centric organization? I think a lot of organizations today, especially within the enterprise software space, tend to think about this in a more focused manner because they provide software as a service. So they do have regular teams that are regularly reviewing utilization of their products. Who's using them? How often are they using them? Who are the super users of the product? How do we engage them more? How do we journey map? How do we make sure that we have empathy and survey them on a regular basis? So that was a really big area. And if you don't have these programs in place, there's always ways to start, which I'll talk about in the future slides around operations. Looking at the next phase is really evangelizing a growth mindset. I've been around design thinking a good amount of time. I didn't quite get it. I'll be very honest with you. I had heard the terms, I've been in sessions, but really from my perspective, a growth mindset allows you to avoid failure. I probably have my colleague Marla on this call, who's a big champion of this as well. And we really want to make sure that we're not worried as much around failing. So we continue to try, we continue to be transparent, and where there's pushback from the business around, well, if we give our customers a voice collectively in a public setting, they're going to complain about us. In my opinion, that's fine. It's better than for them to complain to you in a controlled environment, and for you to acknowledge their challenges and show them that you're vested in their interest and vested in delivering the promise you made to them in the sales process. And the next step is really align to existing adopted best practices within your culture. If your organization is going through a cultural transformation, find out what these initiatives are. So a lot of time should be spent in educating yourself around the various things that are happening in your organization. And you can certainly find these in communication that's going through to employees on a regular basis. If you have questions and don't know about that, I strongly urge you to connect with your HR representative within the business, or your people solutions, or someone within internal communications to help point you in the right direction. Now, moving on to operations, which I think once you've figured out the culture piece, or at least have answered some of these questions, it's easier to then try to operationalize and integrate community into the fabric of how you do business. And from this standpoint, I remember sitting in a session with our COO, and they were talking about the supply chain of selling. And earlier on in one of the sessions around going to market with community, there was a conversation around journey mapping and how you do it once and you tend to forget about it. So I think it was after sitting through many of these journey mapping sessions where I had my aha moment that it's very important for you to align how you're structured internally to that sort of North Star of what that journey is supposed to look like. So how do you make sure that what the journey that you've defined aligns with your internal structure? And the way for many community leaders to consider this is identify high priority business areas. My exposure at that time to senior leadership, general managers, people that manage P&Ls, gave me a different view into what they value the most. If you think about it, these individuals are spending time looking at growth within their business. So net new growth, how am I acquiring new customers, and how are we doing in that process? How many of my customers are happy with me? Are they staying with us? Are they leaving? And other metrics such as your CSAT scores, how are you providing support to your existing customers? So find out what those key priorities are, find out what those quarterly business reviews or monthly reviews take place, and find a way to highlight community in those reports. That's probably the easiest way to get C-level and executive level attention. Be careful, it's a double-edged sword, so be prepared to articulate the value of the community, but really find out how can you help deliver value in these areas. Particularly most communities, as I'm sure everyone here knows, do a wonderful job or have a great opportunity to deliver value in a support setting. So find out how can you do one-to-many, how can you help deliver, whether it's documentation or proactive support through your community, and partner with that organization. The second area is if you have a voice of the customer program, find out how can you identify the challenges they're having, the reasons your customers may be leaving. Is it a particular problem with the product itself, or is it knowledge of the product? And I think that's when it's very helpful to understand who your super users are and understand your advocates, and find out how do you extract that knowledge and distribute it in the form of content. And when we talk about operations, it's really, I think one of the biggest values communities deliver is the ability for every individual from sales to marketing to implementation to support and account management is talking to customers. So ask yourself, if these teams are talking to customers, customers are sharing their problems with them, and they're solving these, are these various teams talking to each other? And I think that's an area where community becomes a catalyst to drive change across organizations and bring that knowledge that's stuck in silos into an area where you can distribute it widely across your community. And the last piece, which I think is very important, is gather commitment, whether it's setting OKRs, setting KPIs, whatever you call them, goals and agreements. Document these and make sure that they're communicated across your organization, not just at the C-level or the executive level, but all the way down to middle management, and continue measuring these. Now, moving to my favorite topic, which is technology. And I'm hoping that we'll have some time towards the end to answer any questions that you may have, is make sure that your technology roadmap and the way you think about integrating technology into both your community as well as your internal technology needs are well thought out. I think we tend to get too excited and want to try new things at times, but I remember a time when one of the communities that we launched, we were really eager to align with an internal technology team to roll out a new login process. As amazing as that was, and as amazing as it was for us to think that we're now going to reach a large number of users, we ended up blocking our users from entering the community. And it took us a significant larger investment to fix that and bring the members back than others. There were other times where we wanted to do a migration and we maybe turned the forums off, and that was a big shot in the foot that over time we recovered from. So again, it's okay to fail. Technology is definitely an area where you may see failure more often than others. But spend your time to thoroughly think about how will this impact your community, how will this impact your users, and how can you best deliver that experience for them. Again, I left this part last because I'm sure there's a lot of technology experts and vendors at this event itself, which I also got a lot of help from in picking our vendor at my current organization. But really, don't rush through this technology strategy and implementation. Take your time, get to know all the players out there, find a vendor that has the right relationship and has the right customer focus and culture. In my opinion, being in enterprise software, as I'm sure many others will agree with this, features and functionality are great. They don't always drive long-term success. It's the relationship that you have with that team and their vested interest in your success that really drives that. And most importantly, find a seat at the table with your internal enterprise technology teams. You may start by simply finding out where they have their architecture designs. How do you fit in? What are the other teams that are creating digital experiences for your customers, and how can you partner with them so you can not only leverage some of their budget, but also have the opportunity to be aligned with them as you roll out these experiences. Now, as a key takeaway, communities don't happen overnight. Be patient. They take a long time to build. As I showed you, some of those pictures of SAP are very early on in my early days of my career, which was almost 11 or I think actually 13 years ago now that I think about it, since I moved on. And it takes a long time to cultivate these relationships, but some of those individuals that I've met there are still my closest friends, my mentors, and still keep me close to a brand that I no longer work around, but I will continue to maintain those relationships. So thank you for your time. I'll switch to questions now. I know we had some technical difficulties, so I want to make sure that there's an opportunity for us to answer any questions anybody may have.
Thanks, Aslan. Really interesting. Oh, there you are. Great to see you.
There we go.
Thanks for showing your face. All right, let's have a look at the questions. So we've got a few in here. Let's start with from Mark. He says, you talk about being customer-centric. What is your thought regarding being community-centric? How does that play out?
I think community-centric and customer-centric to me are the same. We tend to see a lot of paths between community leaders ending up in a customer success role. I think part of my role early on and the success I had in my chief of staff and customer officer role was being a community manager. You're always you're always 1 foot on the customer side and 1 foot on the internal side. So I think those go hand in hand. Now, community has a collective voice. And if you can cultivate that, then you have a much more powerful message to your leadership to drive change where possible. Sometimes those changes are not something that is within scope, and you just have to be honest with your community and your customers as well.
Yeah. And Shika asks, I don't know if I got her name right, how do you define meaningful customer collaboration?
That's a very good question. Meaningful customer collaboration, in my opinion, is one, there are a couple of ways to go about this. One is understanding their needs. So do you really know what the customer wants? Do you truly understand their needs and desires? Sometimes those are within the scope of what you promised, and sometimes they're not, but that doesn't mean that you can't fulfill those needs. So I think a meaningful customer engagement is really the ability for you to continually have that open dialogue with them. And also to ensure that the various teams that you're having interact with them internally have a collective understanding of what those needs are. So you don't have one team helping them in one area and solving a problem where the other team is focusing on something else. The other aspect of it, I think, is we tend to look at customer success through the lens of a lot of reports and surveys. Your NPS report may go to a particular user. The user may say, the product is great, my experience is great. But it could also go to an executive and they say, no, I don't like this. So their reasons for why they appreciate the engagement with you may be different. So I would say, ask more, spend more time, empathy interviews help, survey your customers on a regular basis, and see how you can best help solve their problems. I wish I had a more succinct answer to that, but I think it's a very broad question. So happy to follow up on a private discussion or after the event as well, this session.
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion. We were in a session with Katie Ray and spent a lot of time talking about surveys and really trying to get to the root of what people want and what their goals are. Okay, we've got another question from Katie here. How do you show leadership that community building takes time?
Mm-hmm. That's also a wonderful question. When I joined my current organization, before I accepted the role, I was very clear that these things are not going to happen overnight. But it really comes down to the small wins. You can't just expect your senior leadership to wait 2-3 years for something to happen. So you have to come up with KPIs and measurements and reports and goals that any initiative that you launch, you have to be able to measure at every point of that. So some of the things that we measure are simply, are people logging into the community, right? I'm sure you guys have seen these all around. Okay, they're logging in. Are they consuming anything? And are they coming back? So we started with those, but we also started with more specific wins. When a customer comes and clearly says, hey, I was not able to solve this problem elsewhere, but I'm able to solve it here. So those small wins initially are really big, and you have to celebrate them early on to say, look, similar to any startup, you have to have an MVP. And how do you show that that's successful? I think building on top of that success and never settling for those small wins is key, because you have to continually build on that.
Yeah. All right. And we've got a question from Jessica. How do you advocate for the community department to manage customer centricity and the other items you discussed rather than the customer success department, and avoid competing for resources with that team?
I try to avoid competing with resources with any team. I would rather have those teams help mine. So the way that I work with that is, one, I really suggest building strong relationships with the leaders of those teams, if you have one, right? Some organizations may not. It may just be an analytics team that's pulling the data and reports around customer success. But I think it's important to identify who's helping your customers today and how can you help them amplify the work that they're doing. Do you have account management today that's solving problems for customers? Can you show up to their weekly meetings? Or if they don't have one, how do you join their meetings and take some notes around the common problems that they're solving for customers? So I would say I've had challenges in the past where teams have thought, hey, community is trying to come over and take over this space. But after engaging with them, not more than once, right, and explaining the value of community, it's been clear that we're there to help them. And some of these could simply be in the sense of, we don't have the resources to do this, but here are some playbooks. Here are some strategies that we can potentially partner on to help. Even if we don't have those resources today, let's identify these paths. Let's figure out and not necessarily fall into the linear thinking trap of, well, we'll wait to hire someone before we can do this. So how do we create some approaches that we may be able to execute on at a later time and go from that path? But I'm a big advocate that if you're in a large organization, there's probably someone that does something similar to what you're doing. So it's much easier to partner than to recreate or create a shadow customer organization under community.
I think you can get really defensive, right, in some of these situations, and you got to treat your organization like you're a public community in lots of ways, and come up with strategies to engage them and get them on side. All right, we've got a few more questions. Let's try and get another one in. So Paula asks, what's the best way to begin a customer journey map in regards to mapping how their experience intertwines with the community?
Yeah, wonderful, Paula. So earlier on, I mentioned look at the existing methodologies that your company uses. If you have most marketing departments use a methodology from, let's say, Serious Decisions and some of the others. If they have one, great, because what you can do is you can extract their content and show your leadership and marketing team of, hey, we follow these practices, and here's the recommendation from these big organizations on how we can integrate community. So, for example, if you're looking at the various stages of the buyer journey, which are, hey, I think I have a problem, I need to learn more about this. Well, how do you create content that addresses those? And there was a session I attended with Adrian from Vanilla and Higher Logic, which there was another community leader presenting an aquarium. And he said, community looks like an aquarium to your customers. So in the age of try it before you buy it, it's much easier for you to show your customers how your solutions are being used and address that phase of, I don't know what I want, but I need to do some research. And then at every different stage of the journey, whether it's, we bought the solution, to we implemented it, to we're using it, there's always the ability to deliver valuable content, but you have to continually push to extract that content and to distribute it across your community. And also test, right? Do people care about it? If not, move on to the next thing.
Constantly changing. That was another big topic of today. Well, really appreciate your time, Aslan. It was awesome. Yeah, big thanks from me and from everyone here, and thanks for everyone for attending and engaging in the chat. We're getting towards the end of the sessions. We've still got another one, and there's still a networking party to happen, and how to raise backyard chickens. So I believe chickens has become the emoji of CMX Summit Rise. So give it up for Aslan. Thanks very much, and ever enjoy the rest of your day, evening as it comes.
Thank you so much, everyone.